So the final update report is around neighbourhood policing, and this is something that is a clearly a priority for myself and West Yorkshire Police, because whilst there are many aspects to policing, and we've explored quite a few this afternoon. Neighbourhood policing is often the most visible, and one that many of our partners, councillors, MPs, community members recognise and value in terms of potential day-to-day, well not day-to-day, but regular contact, and providing that reassurance that we all want to see. And obviously, despite the budget cuts of recent years, I have been able to raise some additional funding through the Police Council tax precept, which will see an additional 264 officers and some specialist staff recruited over the next 12 months, with many of those finding their way into our neighbourhood policing teams. And as part of that, been able to protect the number of PCSOs over 600 within our neighbourhood policing teams. So I'm sure you're aware, I often am contacted about the state of our neighbourhood policing footprint in West Yorkshire, and that's why there is a bit of a focus on having updates in this area, until we feel we've sort of embedded the current structures. And I know you'll touch on the review that will take place in the near future as well. So please, can you give an update? Thank you.
Okay then, so in relation to neighbourhood policing, as you quite rightly point out, since CSR 2010, resources within neighbourhood policing have been denuded somewhat, but clearly as a result of the rise in precept and that investment that you made available to neighbourhood policing, we've now rebuilt that, and 14 months on since the launch in 2018, it's now embedded. So you alluded to the post-implementation review, which is going to conclude in July of this year, and we'll bring those results to you. We'll touch on the overview in terms of the HMIC FRS visit to the force and the highlight around their insight work. We'll touch on the staffing, the training, and certainly current delivery, focusing on early intervention, engagement and reassurance, and also problem solving. And then we'll point to our future plans in terms of neighbourhood policing. So, Catherine.
Okay, so I appreciate how important neighbourhood policing is for you and for communities, and you're absolutely right in that it's the part of policing that touches communities regularly, and it's a familiar face and it builds confidence. So for all of those reasons it's really important, and that this is the area that I've kind of been in most of my service, and so I'm a real strong supporter of neighbourhood policing, and the commanders understand that. So I suppose where I start with this is, whilst we've been ongoing with our journey now for 14 months, and I think, as Russ says, we are, the model and the way people are working is very much embedded, we do need to keep an eye on other issues that quickly pull people away from neighbourhood policing, such as the demand at this end of the police service, which you've got to really balance with the neighbourhood footprint to make sure that we really protect the people as far as we can in neighbourhood policing, because they're the people that are delivering the majority of that problem solving and reductions for us. So we've got to have an eye on that, being able to sort of hold our nerve really and have an eye on that longer term problem solving. The post-implementation review, as we mentioned a little bit earlier on, will start in July and will commence in end of August, early September, and we will bring an update on that to the next meeting. And we took a reasoned view on on that, given the prioritisation of resources within corporate services, and the fact that we'd had a recent insight visit from our inspectorate, HMIC FRS, who, when they visited the force and had a look at our neighbourhood policing footprint, were very complimentary of where we were in terms of implementing the model, and really liked our links with integrated offender management that we've talked about already, ASB, problem solving, early intervention, the knowledge around organised crime groups that our neighbourhood staff have. And whilst they might not have tested physically with people in communities what that contact feels like on a daily basis, what they were content with is that there were very clear processes and expectations in place about what that should look like. So in terms of staffing then, in terms of some of the detail, we continue to work really hard to make sure that when we do have gaps in neighbourhood policing that they're filled as soon as we can do that. On a positive note, quite a lot of our PCSOs gain a lot of experience from being in the neighbourhoods. Because we're recruiting, they quite often then become police officers and we're having to backfill the PCSOs. So there is a workforce plan that sits behind that, but we do make as much effort as possible to recruit people into gaps. And also, as I've mentioned, to make sure that we ring-fence people, to make sure that if they are answering calls for service, they are appropriate calls for service within their neighbourhood area that you would expect them to pick up anyway. The deployment policy within the neighbourhood strategy clearly outlines the roles and responsibilities of the neighbourhood staff and what we expect of them. Touching on training then, the intensive engagement training that we got the money from to deliver has now been delivered to almost 300 officers and staff, which really is not just about problem solving, but more about how you can involve communities to become more sustainable and solve their own problems, so that we can really act as coaches and mentors, I suppose, in our role. And then things remain safe in communities when we step away, because we can't be there 24 hours a day on every street. Sorry. People that have attended those training sessions with intensive engagement were asked to bring a difficult problem that they were struggling with in their own area of work. And then they went away following the training to apply a number of questions to that problem with a view to coming back at some point in the future in terms of how they've actually implemented. So we should be able to come back to you at some point in the future with a view to, I've been on the training, this is the particularly difficult problem, I applied these principles that I learned during the training, this is the difference it's made, or not, and what can we learn from it, because something's working, clearly something's done, and that's just as important to learn from. What else do I need to mention in terms of that? There are two specific areas, one in Leeds and one in Kirklees, where we are doing a very specific piece of work with intensive engagement, and again, more on that to come, because that's a 40-week programme, but we should have interim updates in part of that 40-week programme, so that can come back to a future meeting. Clearly, early intervention is one of the main pillars of the neighbourhood policing model. What I would say is, whenever we talk about early intervention, and a lot of the examples that are in here are early-ish intervention, but not early intervention. Sometimes it is the earliest time we can intervene, because it's the first time they have come into contact with the police or criminal justice services. But clearly, there is lots of things that have happened in the interim that, had we been aware of as partners, not necessarily as police, we could have become upstream. And we've talked about one example this morning, haven't we, at the LAM, where we were watching a particular body-worn video, actually, of somebody being stop-searched who had a blade on them. But actually, notwithstanding that fact, that was the first time that person had been stop-searched and arrested by the police. But when we then look back with partners, we can see that teachers are worried about him, everybody at school's frightened of him, he's being disruptive, he's all of the things we talked about ACEs, he's being subject to, you know, or witnessing domestic abuse in his household. All of those telltale signs are there. That is the earliest point we have been able to intervene with him, because it's the first time we've become aware of it. But there is earlier intervention that can be done. And I think, you know, the local authorities lead on this. We've clearly got a part to play in it. And I won't read out all of the different examples in the report about how the different local authorities have got, you know, early intervention hubs, early help hubs, dedicated PCSOs and so on. But we are working on further clarity about exactly what do we mean when we say early intervention, what does that look like, and if you follow it as far upstream as you'd want to, could we cope with that demand? Because I don't think we would be able to. The same as I said with the other stuff we've just been talking about, the volume would be overwhelming. So we're working through that at the moment, but I think that's probably one of the most difficult things within neighbourhood police and probably policing in general, to try and understand and work through and try and think what the gaps in the interventions that we need for those young people. Engagement, again, really key part of our neighbourhood strategy. We've got 30 Facebook pages and 502 Twitter accounts at the moment, and our contact centre also is suggesting a growing number of people within our communities are happy to communicate online with us, which should help in due course to reduce some of that 101 demand that we're facing and increase 999s. We've just gone live with our West Yorkshire Community Alert messaging system on the 1st of May, and we've got somewhere between 5,000 and 6,000 people signed up to that already. So really positive, and clearly, from a neighbourhood point of view, that's a key tool for neighbourhoods to use to get messages out to communities, not just wider crime prevention messages, but also targeted messages at times when we need to. Some of our staff have been identified and trained as super bloggers, and they will be given responsibility for posting key messages to groups and communities on that platform.
Yes, I met one of them over at Leeds East MPT the other week. Yes, I was impressed.
And what? Sorry,
I was impressed.
You were impressed.
Yeah.
It's a really good system.
Yeah.
So I would really, encourage anybody who is listening into this to have a look at Community Alert messaging system. You can set different filters to make sure that you're happy with what types of information you're getting. But it's a really good way to keep up to date with what's happening in communities, especially from a police point of view. We hope clearly that will increase public trust through the engagement. It's an extra way of engaging, it's not the only way of engaging, obviously. And we hope that it will help us to reach different types of communities that perhaps wouldn't ordinarily turn up at a standard neighbourhood meeting, if you like, because it's just not the way that they want to engage with the police. The neighbourhood teams are continuing to enhance the neighbourhood watch scheme. We've currently got over 2,500, and again they continue to expand. We need to make sure that they're not just there in name and that they really work for us, but again they can link in with that community messaging service. And then finally, problem solving. We've already heard, I think, quite a lot of good examples about problem solving in the different areas that we've already talked about today. But I suppose, whilst we normally think about problem solving as a problem with antisocial behaviour on a particular street and kids playing football, and then we mow the lawn somewhere and we get them a place to play, and that's the kind of thing that quite often we talk about when we problem solve. There is actually some really, I would say, more hard-end problem-solving going on within our neighbourhood policing teams, and a couple that I bring your attention to is some issues with serious organised crime in Bradford, and burglaries being committed over the neighbourhood area, but also across the border. And that neighbourhood team have worked really hard in setting up an operation to minimise the use of the road network to those criminals, and as a result of that operation, just picking out a couple of the things there, 31 arrests made, 97 traffic stops, 41 stop searches, 173 vehicles seized. So a really positive and powerful operation against some quite high-end criminal groups from a neighbourhood policing team, which people might not necessarily associate with problem solving in neighbourhoods. Again, I think a really good, innovative example of a hard-to-reach community. The Polish community at Wakefield perhaps wouldn't respond to coming to a church hall on a Tuesday night, but the neighbourhood sergeant there has identified that and gone to speak to people at a warehouse in Wakefield where a number of the Polish community are employed to build better relationships, and once those relationships are built, we can then start talking about domestic abuse, hate crime, modern day slavery and other things that we want to feed into those groups. So we're trying to get a balance between people and place management. Chris Joyce, our crime reduction officer, is really passionate about this area of work and has been and presented to the last local policing governance board. So to say, and he's absolutely right when he phrases it in this way, we can problem solve with individuals as much as we want, but if we don't problem solve the place, then when those individuals come out of prison perhaps, they come back into the same environment and everything starts again. So a real focus at the moment on not just problem solving with individuals, and individuals within places, but actually focusing on the place itself as an environment and making it as disruptive as possible for people, or as hostile as possible, I think is the word that's used for criminals, and safer for people who are living there and doing the right thing. What else do I want to mention? There's a number of different things which you can read at leisure in that report in terms of examples of problem solving, but for future, further work with our PCSOs to really examine the role that they are carrying out at the moment. They're a key part of our neighbourhood policing footprint. You know, members of the public really value their local PCSO. And again, you know, just touching on this morning, we've watched a really impactful piece of body-worn video whereby a PCSO has been, well, two female PCSOs on their own in a really difficult situation with 7 or 8 males fighting from different communities, which I would suggest, had response officers attended, perhaps would have ended up in a more escalated confrontational situation. But actually those officers knew every single person who were fighting, and whilst they were having difficulty getting between them, were really able to calm that situation as much as possible, because they were able to speak on a level with people that they knew, even though they couldn't resolve the whole situation. So I think the value of PCSOs was mentioned this morning at the League Slam, and I think it really struck home when I watched that video. So a task and finish group has been set up to identify all of the things that PCSOs do at the moment and how we can link them in more effectively with further areas of work such as early intervention moving forward. And we're doing a piece of work about examining how local MPTs can improve their communications with partners and local councils as well. I've already talked about early intervention offer at length, so I think probably in summary that's the highlights of the neighbourhood report.
Thanks, Catherine. I think you've answered the question around the slight delay to the implementation review. Yeah. So, just to clarify then, for the next COM meeting, we should be able to discuss the findings or the outcomes of that.
I was going to mention that. Yeah. So for that meeting on the 24th of September then, you've got it on your agenda in terms of neighbourhood policing. Do you want the results of the post-implementation review?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. So you referred to, just to be clear, the intensive engagement reference is the name of it's the name of an organisation, isn't it? Which I understand, was funded through the Partnership Executive.
It was, yeah.
Through a bid
Yeah.
that came in, and you mentioned it on a few occasions. It was really just, again, you referred to some of it, but it's just making sure we are monitoring the impact and value of that training, and I'm keen to understand how officers have the capacity to use what they've learned, and also I think we're still waiting for an outcome around some of the specifics on the project.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think in terms of the wider learning, not just from the people that are in the specific areas in Kirklees and Leeds, where we've chosen two intensive areas, that wider, everybody was asked to bring a problem. They've all had the questions posed. We'll get some feedback in terms of how they utilise that moving forward. I think, I suppose that exactly the same, I would reply in exactly the same way in terms of that capacity and time. This is about us, as far as we possibly can, making sure that abstractions, well, they are monitored, but making sure that we allow our neighbourhood policing officers and PCSOs to problem solve and do that kind of work versus picking up demand when things are busy. And hopefully I've given you the reassurance in other answers that I've given that we do keep an eye on that and we do monitor it. In terms of the complex locations, like I said, they are 40-week projects. There was a slight delay in getting those off the ground in terms of, first of all, from our point of view, because we need a specific SLT or inspector spot to make sure that they are monitored and driven forward, and we had a couple of changes in personnel. But also, there's a really clear partnership focus to that problem solving and community engagement. And so it's important that we, whilst there might have been a short delay, we get the right people around the table to start off in the right way. So I think that delay was worth it. So we're off and running with that now. It's around about 40 weeks, so it's going to be late this year, early next year before we have the final report. But they are, we will have incremental progress reports as we go along. So we'll be able to at some point bring in at least a feeling of where we're going with some of those and the success or not of them to a future meeting.
Yeah, because I mean, on page 2 of the report, I'm pleased that you're saying that you want abstraction to remain minimal. And yes, I know that there's going to be instances where that is difficult because of the nature of incidents that occur. But I was at the performance meeting.
Oh, the force accountability.
Sorry, force accountability.
Yeah.
And we were back into some of the conversation around the call centre, staffing and demands, and what I would really hate to see is sort of police officers being taken off the streets to go and man or staff call centre posts, and it comes back to this cycle of making sure we've got police staff employed permanently in some of those roles rather than having to rely on police officers going in. So, and we're coming up to a summer peak period, obviously, and I hope we can sort of work that through, perhaps in a better way than what we've got this year.
Well, just to provide you some reassurance there, we have anticipated that. There has been some money committed to some overtime. And more longer term, we are looking at big data. We are an outlier in terms of police officer versus police staff within contact management. So that will be another opportunity for us to explore, looking at some effectiveness, efficiencies driven out of the contact management area of business.
Good. Well, we'll talk to you in more detail outside of this meeting on that one. But yeah, thanks for that. So, looking at the current delivery and in particular the importance of early intervention, can you say a bit more about the different approaches and the deployment of the PCSOs in primary schools? Because again, I have visited a few schools recently and some really quite alarming sort of incidents that certain schools have really then felt very threatened by. We've met Sarah Whitehead on a few occasions, who's done a lot of the mapping work, and again around that sort of intervention and prevention agenda, it's just really getting a better take on what we are doing with primary sort of infant schools in particular.
Yeah, so we've got, some of our areas and neighbourhoods do this really well and it's fully embedded. Not the case across all of the neighbourhood teams, but it will be very shortly. So we've got a directory now across each of the districts which identify our 779 primary schools in West Yorkshire, which that includes independent, faith and special needs schools as well. Many of these, as I say, have already got long-standing and positive links with the PCSO already, so I'm not suggesting for a minute that we're going to move that and put somebody else in there for the sake of that. Clearly we're not going to do that, but what the purpose is to ensure that every school's got a named PCSO attached to them, and that PCSOs are very clear what they're expected to do when they're there, how they use the school's toolkit to build positive relationships between the police and the young people. Probably equally important, how they also manage the relationship with the staff at the school and the head, because they're there to engage, to build confidence, to talk to the young people and not to be a parking monitor outside of school. And that is sometimes, I think, what people get drawn into, and we've got to be very, very clear that we're there from a policing point of view to do a number of things in terms of early intervention and building relationships with those young people. There's been training for our PCSOs on schools engagement, and over 250 of our PCSOs have now received that. Like I say, I think this is building on an already fairly positive picture. We could do more. It will be part of our universal early intervention offer. And moving forward, once we've got every one of those schools attached with a PCSO, we're looking to deliver a once-termly newsletter to all of those primary schools. And similar, we've got plans with the secondary schools as well, because that's already quite well established. And we're getting some really positive feedback from that, so we want to do the same thing with the primary schools, to let them know from a West Yorkshire point of view what our the key messages are that we want to pass to them, and any other issues that we want them to be aware of in terms of our relationships with schools. We'll continue to develop the school's toolkit, which is done alongside Sarah that you've already mentioned, and we'll continue to do the CPD for PCSOs relating to schools engagement.
Yeah, because I think what's come over in some of my conversations as well is that there'll be some PCSOs who are better suited to that type of engagement and role than others. And that's not criticism, it's just, I think, a fact of life. But so it's where, identifying the right people, and sometimes whether, it might be somebody else within the MPT that might be better placed than the particular PCSO.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I think with 779 schools,
you'd have to target.
We've got to be, yeah. And I know that within the neighbourhoods, when people clearly have those skills, they will be focused on our most problematic primary schools in terms of the work we need to do there. So, I think there'll be some primary schools where it will be an occasional friendly face and some delivery of some wider universal teaching plans. Some places will need some really intensive intervention and activity, and that needs to be with the people that have got the skills and abilities to do it from a natural point of view.
Okay, I think that again, when we're looking at the sort of the wider work around the violence reduction, this is in some cases territory that we might need to just explore around what other interventions might be required, depending on which area and what some of the issues are in some of those areas. So I agree with you in terms of the community alert. That I think it's a really positive development, and you've already said around the sign up, and I think we're keen to get engaged in what we might be able to do collectively around that in developing it as it goes. So I guess that's more of a comment. I think you also mentioned, Catherine, around the upsurge in online contact within the report, and again, could you just sort of explain a bit more around that and how that is, or how it's been dealt with in terms of the demand sort of aspect and the contact that then follows on the back of it, and what opportunities it brings as well.
So I just asked earlier on actually for the figures. If you look back to 2015-16, we were at 161,000 interventions online, whereas last year we're up to 157,000. So a big increase in how the public can use online reporting. And I think where it really comes into its own, clearly if you're in an emergency 999 situation, you're not going to wait for online and start typing out what's happening. You wouldn't expect people to.
Yeah.
But when you are in a non-emergency situation, but it is something that you want the police to know about and deal with, then actually for many people, but actually for people who might struggle, perhaps more vulnerable people who might struggle to have quite a fast-paced conversation and feel that they're under pressure on a phone, actually being able to type out and get down that information about what's happening with descriptions and so on, and do it in a fairly controlled way, I think is quite good for a number of people. So it is available to anybody to contact West Yorkshire Police. Like I say, it is on the rise. There are lots of different technologies that in the future we can add to live chat to make things easier for people to contact police, just as they do with other interactions in their daily life. And having spoken, obviously this is not my kind of day-to-day area of the business, but having spoken to Tom Donahoe, who's our contact manager, he is a really strong proponent of this and thinks that this is clearly one of the ways that we need to continue to push on reducing demand in call handling. So I don't think it's very clear whether this increase in online reporting means this decrease in numbers of people ringing us. I don't think that correlation is quite as obvious as we perhaps want it to be, because it can't be. But I suppose what his view is that he feels that despite the number of 999s increasing, actually 101s are reducing, and so some of that will be as a result of people being able to contact us online.
Yeah, and it's better understanding that, and the better we get at dealing with that sort of online communication and contact, then you would hope it should start to ease some of the more acute demand within the system. But there's probably a bit more work to do there, isn't there, to understand that correlation. Yeah.
When you look at other government agencies, they're leaning towards contact by email and responding obviously not as quick as we would do if they were calling us. So, it is an area that we're going to exploit.
And it's really just an ask around keeping me updated around the work to improve communications with partners, councils, etc. So I'm interested in the consultation and guidance that you referred to, toolkits, etc. within the report.
So I think probably two specific areas of work of concern, or of interest to you, I should say, not really concern. So the first one is general communication and information sharing during meetings with wider partners and local elected members and councils, etc. So at Leeds, I think there's quite often a confusion and a bit of awkwardness around what exactly can be discussed in front of who, and what can we share with who and for what purpose. Sarah Towers at Leeds, one of the inspectors, has been working on quite a good structure, I think, in terms of pulling the meeting together on a neighbourhood level with partners where the place is discussed first. So that wider, how do we as a partnership make this place feel safer, is discussed first. And then the closed meeting that follows, which is very clear who's there and who isn't, then goes into the specifics of the individuals, so that you don't end up with that difficult, I'm not sure you're supposed to hear this, I'm not sure, you know what I mean, which it is sometimes difficult because of the conversations that happen. So we've kind of been trying that, and it seems to be working really well, and we've had some good feedback from the people that have been in those meetings. So information management are just working on the guidance and the templates that we can use in those meetings, and then we're going to share them widely with partners and kins and yourself for feedback and thoughts on those. Then a second aspect then is updating people at times of criticality, and I guess routine business, but more about, you know, something's happened overnight, how do we appropriately get that message out in the right way to the right people in a timely way. So again, one of the districts is bringing together a template. Well, I suppose the first thing to say with this is, what I have found when I've been speaking to people is, depending on who your local elected members are, depends on what kind of updates people want. So in one particular ward, for example, people have said, look, that newsletter that you send out, you send it too often, we don't need it that often, please refrain and send, we're happy for this to be sent every 3 months or 4 months. Other people want updates more often than that. Some people want updates in a particular fashion, would rather it be face-to-face. Other people are quite happy with a newsletter. And so it's quite a difficult balance, I think, to get this right, and one size doesn't fit all. So we are looking, and each of the districts are looking at different ways of doing that, which fits with their kins and elected members when there is a critical incident or potential community tension. And then whatever templates and principles we agree can then be shared, with the flexibility to be able to then bespoke it if needs be to different areas. Because what I'm really conscious of is not just rubber stamping and saying this is what you will all get from West Yorkshire Police, when actually something might fit better, and I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot in that respect. So yeah, not one size fits all is what I'd say, but work ongoing.
Yeah, so in the first instance there, Catherine, so I think that would be helpful in terms of getting some clarity around that tasking sort of the local meeting where the partners come together, because I do get different answers and different responses from councillors and even police in different areas. So having some core understanding on that would be helpful. I think on the, you're right, I accept that, councillors from whatever persuasion or background, will have different sort of asks and needs. But I would just ask that if through my office I can be broadly sort of kept updated as to what the methodology is, and I'm not saying I need to be notified about everything that goes out, I don't, but having a general feel for it would be helpful.
It'd be helpful because quite often people come to you first, don't they? And then, so actually, if you know what our general principles are, it'd be helpful for you to be able to have that discussion on our behalf. And again, particularly with whether it's inspectors, chief inspectors, people in positions where they're doing risk assessments around, what is the type of incident that we would potentially just need flagging, so that I'm aware before I get a contact from left field where I've got no idea about something that's gone out. So it's just bearing that in mind. Yeah, make sure that's picked up then. Just see about that linking with the OPCC at the same time.
Okay. Thanks. That's it from me, Jane, unless you've got anything else.
Can I just go back to the abstraction rates, Catherine, because you've reported that they're monitored and evidence shows that they're remaining at a minimal level, which is very reassuring, but as we've also said, is something that gets a lot of publicity and airing, and we do get kind of anecdotal approaches around abstraction levels, and I wonder if you could help us with some data. Last time you said to us that you were sure that abstractions would be for just specialist skills only, and you talked about call handling and public order, but it would be good to see that monitoring data if that's possible.
Yeah, we do have the monitoring data, so
Thank you.
Do you want us to pick that up when we present the PIR then?
Well, it would be good to come at that point, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you for that update, and that's the no more questions on that. Catherine?